Many years after the apocalypse strikes the world, demonic, human-eating creatures known as the Burned Ones lurk in the woods. Simultaneously, some survivors form a cult that deems speech a sin and remove their vocal cords to ensure silence forever. Azrael and Kinan manage to escape this cult and are now surviving in the forest alone. One day, Azrael hears a noise among the trees and becomes nervous, so she quickly extinguishes the fire Kinan had started. Still on the verge of a panic attack, Kinan comforts her with affection. In return, Azrael gives him a bracelet she crafted from branches and plants. At that moment, they hear the sound again and realize it's whistling, meaning the cult members are pursuing them. The couple begins to flee, and Kinan decides they should split up, running in opposite directions. Unfortunately, Azrael is soon discovered by a cult member who begins chasing her. But as she attempts to run back, another member captures her, striking her in the stomach to weaken her. The men then drag her through the forest, and Azrael notices Kinan has also been caught. Upon reaching the road, Kinan tries to escape, but the cult members threaten him with a machete. He and Azrael are placed in the trunks of separate cars and taken away. Eventually, the road divides, and Azrael is horrified as each car takes a different path. She pounds on the trunk, trying to open it, but to no avail. Moments later, the car halts, and the cultists drag Azrael to a specific spot deep in the woods. More cult members are waiting, including Josephine, one of the leaders. Azrael is tied to a chair, and Josephine makes a cut on her leg, causing her to bleed, planning to use her as a sacrifice. The wind immediately begins to blow ominously, shaking the bottles hung on the trees. Josephine and the cultists back away and start panting loudly, their silent version of a chant. Soon, a burned one appears from the trees and roars before heading towards Azrael. Panicking, she struggles until she breaks one of the chair's armrests. A cultist quickly returns to restrain her, and Azrael fights back, accidentally stabbing him in the neck with a broken piece of wood. The man stumbles away, only for the burned one to leap onto him, devouring him. In shock, Azrael frees herself from the other restraints and manages to flee. The cultists, including Josephine, have their backs turned as part of the ritual and don't notice Azrael's escape until it's too late. Meanwhile, the burned one drags the dead man's body away. Later, Azrael stops by the river to wash her wound, gathering herbs to wrap around it. While working, a burned one silently approaches from behind. Fortunately, she hears it just in time and runs to take refuge in an abandoned building. Azrael hides in the darkest corner, staying perfectly still as the burned one searches inside. Since it can't see her, it eventually leaves. Azrael follows the road, tracking the tire marks until she finds the cult's camp. Sneaking in, she discovers a hidden spot in the fence that she can open to slip inside. Azrael moves cautiously, evading the guards. After hiding behind a car, she finds Kinan's bracelet lying near some chains and assumes the worst. Just then, Josephine and her men return, so Azrael sneaks around to observe them. She hides behind a tent, watching Josephine check on a sick old woman. Josephine then enters the chapel, where the cult members watch their main leader, Miriam. She's pregnant, but that doesn't stop her from performing the ritual in which she listens to the wind blowing through a hole, supposedly revealing God's will. After several minutes of listening to the wind, Miriam extinguishes the altar candles, and everyone leaves. Josephine lingers, allowing Miriam to slap her for failing the forest ritual, but they're interrupted by a noise outside. When Miriam checks the window, she sees nothing, as Azrael has hidden under the building just in time. Josephine goes out to investigate, forcing Azrael to keep moving undetected. For a moment, she thinks she's in the clear, but Josephine suddenly appears beside her and grabs her legs to prevent her escape. Josephine begins choking Azrael, who kicks her off, striking her in the face. Desperate, Azrael sprints around the camp, avoiding detection. Josephine rings a bell to alert the others of an intruder, and soon the cult members are clanging their bottles and pans to spread the alarm. Azrael is spotted by a few cultists who begin chasing her, so she rushes to the fence, tearing her hands on the barbed wire as she opens the hole to slip through. Her foot gets stuck, and a man grabs it, trying to drag her back, but Azrael fights until she kicks him off and frees her leg. Another cultist fires at her, but the bullet hits a tree, and Azrael escapes. She runs through the woods until nightfall, too exhausted to continue. Still bleeding, she leaves bloodstains on rocks and trees, which soon attract a burned one that begins tracking her scent. Azrael sees it licking her blood from a rock and resumes running as the creature gives chase. Things worsen when a second burned one joins the pursuit. Luckily, the first burned one trips, allowing Azrael to reach the road unharmed. Suddenly, a light appears ahead, and she collapses as something massive approaches. A truck stops just before hitting her. The driver exits and, after recovering from the shock of seeing her, asks if she's a survivor, helping her up. Azrael, disoriented, doesn't respond to his questions and instead pounds on the truck, urging him to drive. He gets back behind the wheel and speeds off into the night. The man offers Azrael a cloth for her wound and tells her he lives at the end of the road, where he has plenty of food. Azrael doesn't understand his language and shows him the cross-shaped scar on her neck, indicating she cannot speak. However, the man still doesn't comprehend and keeps attempting conversation, to no avail. When he finally gives up, he turns on the radio, and Azrael is mesmerized by the music. They barely drive a few miles when the driver is suddenly struck in the head by a bullet. A cultist standing in the middle of the road fires several more shots, but he misses as the truck careens out of control. Azrael tries to take the wheel, but the driver's body is in the way, and the truck crashes into a wall after running over the shooter. After a brief period of unconsciousness, Azrael awakens, her head pounding from a bleeding wound. She stumbles out of the truck, collapsing to her knees in pain, only to see that the cultist is still alive. Azrael lunges at him, struggling to wrestle the gun from him. She strikes him twice on the head before they accidentally fire the gun during their scuffle, causing both to roll down a hill into the forest. Once they separate, the man attempts to shoot her again, only to realize he's out of bullets. He resorts to using the gun to strike Azrael's legs instead. At that moment, Azrael finds the fallen magazine and bashes the cultist over the head with it several times before kicking him away. She crawls toward the gun, loads it, but the man grabs her from behind, trying to strangle her. In the struggle, she manages to aim the gun and fires it, killing him at last. Afterward, Azrael staggers through the forest with the weapon in hand. Near a tree, she is horrified to see a fire burning and slowly approaches it, only to discover Kinnan nailed to the tree. Just as she's about to reach him, Azrael accidentally steps on a trap, and she's hoisted upside down from a branch. At that moment, a cultist appears and seizes her gun, using it to strike Kinnan. Suddenly, the wind picks up, distracting the cultist. Azrael tries to climb the rope, but it only causes more pain to her injured hands. When she looks down again, the cultist has vanished. Out of nowhere, the man is hurled against a tree by a burned one, which begins devouring him. A second burned one soon joins in to help finish off the man. Desperate, Azrael climbs the rope again, despite the excruciating pain in her hands. She reaches the top of the tree just as a third burned one appears, joining the others as they feed on the cultist. Once the creatures finish with the cultist, one drags his body away, but another leaps onto Kinnan, killing him as well. His body is also dragged off after a few bites, and the third burned one starts climbing the tree toward Azrael. She remains still long enough to free her leg from the rope, but this gives the burned one time to catch up, slamming her against the branch with terrifying strength. As the creature is about to bite her, Azrael wraps the rope around its neck and pushes it off the tree, falling in the process. She survives the fall, but the burned one is left hanging by the rope, dead. Later, Azrael returns to the cult's camp, now armed with a gun. Hidden behind a tree, she whistles, mimicking the cultist's signal. Josephine soon arrives with a small group of followers to investigate, leaving an opening for Azrael to sneak back into the camp through the same hole in the fence. Carefully, she makes her way into the chapel and finds Miriam, who displays her pregnant belly to appear weak. When Azrael hesitates to shoot, Miriam swiftly disarms her and hits her over the head with a pan. As Azrael falls, she scratches Miriam's belly. Shortly after, Josephine and the others drag Azrael to a grave in the forest. They smear her face with her own blood while listening to the wind blowing before throwing her into the coffin, sealing it, and covering it with dirt. Panicking, Azrael begins hammering the wood from inside, but no one helps her. Once the burial is complete, a lantern suddenly illuminates the area at Azrael's feet, revealing a tunnel leading out from the casket. She takes the lantern and starts crawling through the tunnel, only to encounter a burned one at the end. She quickly turns back, scrambling to the casket while the creature chases her. soon crawling on top of her. Instead of devouring her, the burned one sniffs her hand and recognizes Miriam's blood. It roars in approval and leaves. Feeling relieved, Azrael ventures back into the tunnel, successfully escaping this time. Moments later, Josephine rushes out of the chapel upon hearing a noise, horrified to discover the tent with the old woman is on fire. A cultist raises the alarm, and the others frantically try to put out the flames, but it's too late. The old woman is dead, and the fire is quickly spreading through the camp. This gives Azrael the perfect distraction to sneak around and start shooting the cult members one by one. Josephine watches in terror as Azrael takes them down, trying to retreat herself, but Azrael shoots her in the stomach so she will die slowly. Amidst the chaos, the flames reach a gas canister, causing a small explosion. One man is devastated to find his girlfriend has been shot. Grabbing a gun, he fights back, exchanging fire with Azrael as they sneak around the camp. As the fire consumes the camp bit by bit, the man grows confused, hearing whistling from various directions. Believing Azrael is toying with him, he fires at the first shadow he sees, only to realize he's killed a fellow cult member. In shock, he freezes, giving Azrael the opportunity for a sneak attack. She decapitates him with a machete. Azrael then returns to the chapel, where Miriam ambushes her from behind, using Azrael's own blade to disarm her. Miriam chases Azrael around the room, knocking benches out of the way to corner her. She pins Azrael against the altar, trying to decapitate her, but Azrael kicks her off. When Miriam attacks again, Azrael dodges and pushes her into the wall, biting her neck. Miriam struggles in pain, and at that moment, her water breaks. Just then, a gunshot rings out, hitting the chapel's cross. Josephine, badly wounded but still alive, slowly approaches, firing her gun as she moves toward Azrael. She stops when she sees Miriam giving birth on the bed. Azrael takes advantage of the distraction to tackle Josephine, smashing a bench in the process. Josephine grabs a piece of broken bench wood and strikes Azrael with it, but Azrael retaliates by doing the same. Josephine then pulls out a small blade and tries to stab Azrael, but Azrael blocks her attack and slams her head into the bench, knocking her down. Without hesitation, Azrael picks up Miriam's knife and stabs Josephine in the neck. At that exact moment, the sound of a baby crying fills the room. With the knife still embedded in her neck, Josephine pulls it out, staggering for a few moments before finally collapsing and dying. Miriam, looking terrified, rises from the bed, but instead of trying to fight, she takes Azrael's machete and ends her own life. As she does, a gust of wind blows through the chapel, extinguishing all the candles. At that moment, a horde of burned ones makes its way through the forest and into the camp, finally reaching the chapel. Azrael, holding Miriam's newborn, realizes something strange. The baby isn't human. Its form is twisted, with the head of a goat and sharp horns, resembling a dark demonic entity. It dawns on her that this child is the Antichrist. The burned ones roar in unison as they approach, their monstrous faces contorted in what seems like reverence. Azrael looks down at the goat-like infant, cradling it in her arms. A wicked smile forms on her face as she understands the power now at her fingertips.